And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. Occupy protests have now popped up all over the nation and even overseas. Many are now wondering what impact, if any, this might have on legislation in the upcoming session here in Albany, or perhaps even on the 2012 presidential election. However, I should say to you, it's also unclear how much longer protesters can keep all of this up, except perhaps in Occupy Tampa, as the cold weather sets in. And there are also now some reports of internal squabbling among demonstrators. This is starting to come out from Zuccotti Park. This is all a little bit tricky here. Occupying our set tonight to discuss it are the insiders, veterans of Albany politics who come to this set each week to talk shop and also to provide analysis on the week's top stories. Joining us tonight are Steve Greenberg. He's a former communications director to 2 Assembly speakers. He's now president of Greenberg Public Relations. He does some polling on the side for Siena College. And then on the other side of the table, we have Dave Catalfamo. He's a former communications director to former Governor George Pataki and is now a partner at Capital Public Strategies. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Liz, so you know, Dave and I agreed this is now officially Occupy Capitol Tonight.
That's right.
Okay, but I just want to point out the rules here are that you cannot erect any structures, and we do have bathrooms down the hall. So please know,
We have the tent right outside.
Yeah, okay, good.
Mayor
It's
Bloomberg
warm in
said
here,
we
though.
could stay as long as we want.
Yeah, and Jennings, too, although Andrew Cuomo, not so much. I just want to say, when I say that you're here to talk shop, it makes it sound like we should be smoking cigars. Anyway, so...
Do we have any serious issues tonight, Liz?
We do.
Oh, okay.
Occupy Albany. And I do want to talk about this. Governor Cuomo, not clear on what he was trying to accomplish there. Steve?
I don't think it was a smart move by the governor. Look, he has played it so well in his first 10 months in office, both on the policy side and on the political side. And I think this was a misstep, at least a communications misstep, in terms of why he wanted to associate himself on the negative side of Occupy Albany. He could have just stayed silent, let the protests go on, but as a result of his trying, or as apparent trying, to not let the protesters stay overnight, it's as a result of that we now have these signs, Cuomoville, etc. I just think it was a misstep on his part.
Yeah, from a communication standpoint, the message fail, in your opinion?
Well, I think that the long-term concern would be that it would create a point of reference, a framing point for issues like the millionaire's tax.
Right.
And that is not what clearly I think the governor wanted. But I think honestly it's a tricky issue for Democrats and Republicans, and we're focused on Democrats now, but I honestly think Republicans ignore it at their own peril, because I think what it is basically a feeling that, and your polling showed it, that people throughout New York have a deep concern. I mean, they're concerned about their jobs, they're concerned about their future. And the fact of the matter that, people are empathetic, maybe not with the solutions that they're putting out, but they're empathetic with the idea of it.
And they're not putting out any solutions,
right,
though.
There are all kinds of crazy things being talked about, but I mean,
that's why I think
some not so crazy.
But that's why I think New Yorkers aren't necessarily identifying with the message coming out of the Occupy movement, but they're identifying very much with the emotion.
That's right.
Their anger, their frustration. We're in the 3rd year of a brutal recession, and I think people are very frustrated, and I think Occupy movement is capturing that frustration, and that's why people identify with it. But I don't think the governor had to worry in terms of the millionaire's tax. Look, he is against public opinion on the millionaire's tax. Has been since before he was governor. That's not going to change. The majority of New Yorkers are going to continue to support a millionaire's tax.
You could see, though, and only just now when you brought it up, Dave, could I play it out in my mind. So let's say that these folks are particularly hardy. They say they're not going anywhere. They can handle an Albany winter. There are tents there, right? So they go through, and now it's January, and now the legislative session has rolled around, and now you get some real outspoken firebrand types like, I don't know, Eric Adams, for example, or maybe some other folks in the Senate Democrats out there with the protesters every day with me and a camera rolling, and that frames the issue, and that is certainly not something you want either.
And it's also the juxtaposition of politicians, whether it be the governor or other folks, and big business. And really, this is geared toward Wall Street, I think, in the largest part. Because the fact of the matter is that government took the risk out of Wall Street. And it's unbalanced. I mean, that's why Teddy Roosevelt broke up the trusts back in, broke up railroad trusts, because there was no risk in what they were doing anymore. Government took the risk out of Wall Street, and because of that, people don't feel like it's fair. The game's broken. And they're right.
Oh, are you? Wait, you are the Republican. I just want to make sure.
Right. Politicians from both sides of the aisle have got it wrong on regulating Wall Street. I'm not saying we should tax them, actually, but the notion and the alignment is correct in that the system is screwed up. When we take the risk out of folks who are going to do business, and there's no risk in doing their business, well, then that's not right.
But go back to your point, Liz, that, if this continues into the legislative session in January, I think the governor, by doing what he did last week, at the end of last week when this first started, actually makes that more plausible. I think if he would have remained silent, it would have been a day, a two, maybe a 3-day protest, and it would have sort of petered out, I think. I think he's given it some momentum.
Maybe it would peter out if we thought that conditions were going to improve, or if we thought that unemployment was going to get better, if we thought that, that Wall Street was going to get, people's, pensions were going to get, they're not. And so while maybe that encampment might have moved on, it would have been back.
In some other way.
Some frustration, sentiment
we saw some of that.
It was not going to go away. I agree.
We saw some of this nascent protesting inside the Capitol, actually. Some of the same folks who are now trying to capitalize on this argument or whatever's going on down there. We're looking at some footage now, and it's a pretty wide variety of folks. Some of them pretty clean cut, some of them not so much. But the thing is that we saw that for people like Strong Economy for All, if you will, and that's the Michael Kink group, that's the labor-backed organizers. There's going to be a march tomorrow, is my understanding, pro-millionaires tax, again, pushing that particular issue. Some of these people got arrested in the Capitol. I mean, we did see protests and demonstrations. This is not something so totally new.
No. Again, we're in the third year of this recession, and people don't like to see cuts in programs that they like, and people don't have a problem taxing the rich.
Okay, let me just, also the definition of what rich is also coming to the fore now, both in Washington and also here in New York. Right?
Well, I think that's why you saw the Assembly Democrats back off of the current quote-unquote millionaires tax, which kicks in at $250,000, and what the Assembly Democrats are pushing now is a true millionaires tax that starts at $1 million.
But I think our policy alignment is toward the millionaires tax when we look at remedies for it, but I think the actual global sort of view of the issue is that it's anti-Wall Street, anti-big business, and that big business is every bit as anathema to these folks as big government is to the Tea Party people.
No question about it. Look, I mean, one of the questions in the Siena poll last week was favorable, unfavorable on Wall Street, not Occupy Wall Street, Wall Street. 26-67, almost 3-to-1 unfavorable toward Wall Street.
The reality is that
which produces thousands and thousands of jobs and revenue.
Steve, 14% or some percentage of the revenue? You might know the number.
About 20% of New York State's personal income tax revenue
to the financial industry.
Comes from Wall Street.
Let me just point this out. I want to sort of bounce this off you guys. At the top of the show, I postulated that, look, Andrew Cuomo has these incredibly high poll numbers, Steve, as you know. He's like Teflon. No matter what the guy does, he's in the 70s. And one of the things that happens when you're very high is that in the polls is that people are afraid to challenge you and say no to you. But now we're seeing some foment, not just this, but the property tax cap overrides and some very angry elected officials saying, who the heck do you think you are and why are you dictating to me and this isn't realistic, etc. That's going on around the state. Some of the minority lawmakers, again, feeling a little bit like they're getting ignored, although they say that a lot and they've said it with other administrations. So I just wonder, is this the beginning of something?
Could be. It very well could be. I mean, look, on the property tax issue, I think that's a little bit different. And from a communications point of view, I think the governor handled that one well. And he said, look, we made it in the law that if 60% support it, you can override the cap. We didn't want to tell people you can't go higher than 2%, but we wanted to set that as the baseline. So I think he handled that communications issue very well. But I think you're right, Liz. I think this has the potential. It's too early to know whether it will actually materialize.
It's going to happen because it happens.
Yeah, there's a law of that. There's like a law of something, whatever happens there.
On the property tax cap, you've talked about it a lot. I mean, look, state mandates outpace the cap. Today, period. End of story. So whether it's this year or next year, if they don't attack the mandates in Albany, then everybody's going to have to bust the cap. And then it's going to be a failure. So something needs to happen this year to address mandates.
And or unless state education and local aid to municipalities increases, which it doesn't look like it's going to, significantly to make up the difference, which is what happened in Massachusetts, I believe.
And that's where the real test of the property tax is going to come in. It's not with the county or town or village budgets and their tax rates, because that's That's a small percentage of your property tax bill, and it's elected officials making the decision. The real test is going to be next May when school budgets go before the voters, and then in order to exceed the 2%, you have to get 60% of the voters in an election.
Not just the people who are sitting at the table in an elected body at the local level. I do want to also, another potential sticky issue for the governor, hydrofracking, could be very explosive. Some of the crowds at the anti-protest folks who are outside hydrofracking events are even bigger than Occupy Albany. Today we hear from D.C. Commissioner Joe Martens that maybe there will be no permits issued in 2012. We knew not until the end of the year, but he's now saying maybe none at all. Now, this seems to me, again, another potential weak point for the governor. You're playing a really dangerous game there.
Well, I think, taking the policy part out of it, the reality is that upstate New York, and this is the thing, and in particular the southern tier and where this resource is, really could benefit from the jobs. And so looking at it, and looking at the industry where they are right now, even if they got a permit next year, the fact of the matter is that investment and whatnot wouldn't start till after. So, take aside everything about it. If you want to create jobs and economic growth in upstate New York, it is a surefire way to do it. And if that doesn't happen, then, you have to talk about it during your next election.
Well, I think this issue has the potential to be a lose-lose for the governor. There is no solid public opinion in support of hydrofracking or in opposition to hydrofracking. I mean, the voters of this state, and it's not an upstate-downstate issue. It's not like upstate so strongly supports it and downstate's opposed. It's really the strongest support for it is in the downstate suburbs. It's generally opposed in the city and in upstate.
So far down the line now. I mean, to pull the plug on it seems to me to be impossible.
Well, as I say, I think this is a tough one for the governor because the public is so divided that no matter which way he goes on this, he's going to take a hit for it.
And you don't need to pull the plug on it to lose. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, again, we measure our success in 4-year terms, right? When we're governors, and the reality is that that even if you were to move forward with it at a later date, the fact of the matter is you may not realize any of the impacts.
Right.
And we do risk. Look, they're finding new formations all the time around the country, and they're developing the technology more. We're not sure that at some point the industry could just bypass New York and say, well, you know what, it's just too hard to do here. We're going to go do it somewhere else.
Well, there's a certain segment of the population in New York that thinks that that's just grand.
That would be great. Yeah.
So I'm not saying one side's right, the other side's wrong. As you note, the numbers are quite close, right? So there's a problem. I just also want to briefly close because we're going to run out of time with the John Haggerty case. Now I know that you had a slight involvement in this, and it was pretty ancillary. And you've known him for a long time. Right. I've known him for a long time too. You don't know him, Steve.
I don't know him.
But I guess what I want to know about this, we know about the appeal we had, Dennis Vacuan, etc. I want to know this: why is there no campaign finance reform call from this? It's so obvious. It's this big glaring hole. Why?
Well, you're focused on the law, on the reform. I'm focused on what I think is a misapplication of the law. The fact of the matter is, when you give a donation to a party or to a candidate, you lose control of that donation. That is the law. That is the law as it's currently on the books. So I don't know how you can be guilty of anything once you lose control of the donation.
I'm not going to second guess the jury. I didn't follow the case closely enough and all the evidence, but I do agree. And I mean, this case is just the latest example of why New York State needs real comprehensive campaign finance reform. Whether or not you support public campaign financing, that's a different debate. We do need campaign finance reform in this state.
Just to close this with this thought, the Occupy movement has somewhat talked about the money problem in politics, but haven't quite made the leap to connect the money problem with campaign finance reform, right? There's too much money. All you rich people are buying off elected officials, et cetera, and because of the Citizens United case and the housekeeping accounts and everything else, federal, state, but still, there's too much money in the systems awash in money, and yet they're not putting it together. So I wouldn't be surprised if we hear a little bit more of that. And I think
the money's on both sides.
Yes, I know. Democrats, Republicans. Everybody's equally
now that
culpable.
Corporations are more involved, as the unions have been. It's a tough argument to make because the public doesn't really grasp the argument.
Well, what they grasp is jobs in the economy, of course. So that's what this is really about.
Right.
I want to thank you very much, Steve Greenberg, for being with us. Thank you very much, Dave Catalfano, as usual. We'll see you next time.
Great.
Yeah, I really think that